The Master of Champions, written by Lin Ocean Volume 1, The Sleeping Force Chapter 1, Tony Dunn. The deafening roar of the crowd sent shockwaves through his nervous system. Its volume enough to make one deaf. A blinding white light pierced his vision, and his temples throbbed with pain. Dunn instinctively squinted his eyes. But the white light didn't fade. Instead, it spread, consuming the entire world around him. What the hell is going on? Am I at a rock concert? He cursed inwardly and opened his eyes, only to be greeted by a face so large it was terrifying, a face dripping with sweat, a white nose flaring with heat from two dark nostrils that seemed to spray directly onto his face. The gaping mouth revealed rows of sharp white teeth, wild like a predator, and a foul stench from within was overwhelming. Then came a violent, direct collision. Dunn felt as though a heavy punch had struck his chin, and his body was sent tumbling backward. Crashed water bottles stacked behind them were knocked over. The weight of two bodies pressing down on the fragile plastic bottles caused them to shatter under the pressure. White splashes of water erupted, and one bottle even shot out a jet of water, splashing directly onto the face of a bystander. Behind them, the other bystanders, startled like a flock of birds, jumped into the air in a panic. Damn it. God damn it. What the hell's going on? Physio, what the hell were you doing? I was pushed by that damn number 14. It wasn't on purpose. Dunn lay on the ground, dazed, staring at the unfamiliar faces surrounding him. Some were anxious, others seemed to enjoy the chaos, and a few had their hands over their faces, hiding their expressions. The noise around him was still deafening, but the shrill, overpowering sound had shifted, now filled with boos and laughter. Where am I? Who are they? What the hell happened? Oh wait. Let's see what's happening at the sidelines. The commentator's voice suddenly became excited. He stood up, leaning over the edge of the top-tier stand to look down. Nottingham Forest star forward David Johnson collided with an opposing player and was pushed into the coaching area, where poor Tony Dunn, the interim coach, was standing. Oh, look at the mess on the ground. This collision is like a meteor hitting the earth. This is far more exciting than the Dow game. Dunn lay on the ground, his light gray suit drenched, crumpled, covered in grass and dirt, looking as though it had been used to wipe up the floor. A man with a large nose and black beard, looking somewhat like Super Mario, appeared in his line of sight. He swiftly pulled out a pair of white gloves from his bag and began to examine Dunn's body. Do you feel any noticeable pain in your ribs? He pressed down on Dunn's chest with both hands. Your chin itches, ma'am. There's some bruising. Are your teeth loose? He pried open Dunn's mouth and tilted his head to inspect, though the man kept asking questions. It was clear he didn't expect answers, as these were merely his habitual musings. And now, your eyes. His gaze fell on Dunn's eyes, and he noticed something unusual. Dunn's eyeballs didn't seem to move, nor had his eyelids blinked. His expression remained vacant, neither frowning nor reacting in pain. He was silent, like a corpse. Damn it, he must have hit his head on the ground. Hey, Dunn, can you hear me? The man waved his hand in front of Dunn's face, his voice now more urgent than before. Dunn's eyes finally moved, his gaze focused on the man's face. Strange, yet somehow familiar. The referee has blown the whistle and stopped the game. I've been commentating football for 31 years, but this is the first time I've ever seen a coach injured by his own player. I bet Tony Dunn will become a headline, though he might not like the fame this way. BBC commentator John Motson continued his endless chatter. Nottingham Forest is having the worst lockdown to goals, and now their interim coach, Tony Dunn, is injured by one of his own players, and this is their home ground, at home. Meanwhile, the television screen repeatedly showed the earlier scene. David Johnson, in a fierce contest with the opposing number 14, was shoved forcefully and then knocked into Tony Dunn, who was standing at the sidelines. Strangely, Dunn could have avoided it. He had enough time, but instead, he stood there like a puppet, helplessly watching his player crash into him. The next moment was enough to make even the commentator squint his eyes, look away, and mutter, "Oh my God." The Forest players anxiously surrounded the coach's bench, with Dunn lying motionless at the center. David Johnson, the culprit, kneeled and prayed fervently. If something happened to the coach, he would be the first player to kill his own manager on the pitch. In contrast to the tense atmosphere among the Forest players, their opponents stood in the field, arms crossed, Watching the spectacle, some, curious, played the role of scouts, running around to share the gossip with their teammates. The Forest fans in the stands didn't seem worried about their coach's life or death. They seized the opportunity to loudly curse their team's poor performance, spitting out words that started with F or S, and countless middle fingers raised high, making the score 0-2 even more glaring on the big screen. Forest's team doctor, Gary Fleming, was still trying his best. He had clearly seen Dunn's eyes move earlier. Then there was no response. He slapped Tony Dunn's face. There was still no reaction. The team's interim coach lay on the ground like a wax figure, mouth slightly open, eyes wide in shock, as though witnessing something startling. Blue sky, the cotton candy clouds, faces of all colors and expressions. The noisy environment, everything felt so familiar yet so strange, as if it were a world away. What the hell is going on? The referee gestured for the team doctor to handle the situation. He couldn't allow the game to stop indefinitely due to an injury off the field. He blew the whistle and signaled for the players to return to the pitch. The match must go on, even though the Forest players had clearly lost their focus. But he could be in life-threatening danger. Gary Fleming was furious at the referee's indifference. He pointed at Dunn, who was still lying on the ground, and shouted at the referee, "Then call an ambulance." "I'm just the referee." The referee fired back without hesitation. "And he doesn't seem as dangerous as you say." He pointed behind Fleming and quickly ran back onto the field. Fleming turned to see Dunn slowly rising from the ground. Clutching the back of his head, he hurried over to help him. "How are you feeling, Dunn?" Dunn looked at him, bewildered, and asked, "Where am I?" Fleming muttered an expletive under his breath. "Things had been going terribly wrong lately. They, come here." He waved over to a blond man from the coaching staff. "How's Dunn?" The man called Day asked as he rushed over. "Terrible. He just asked me where he was," Fleming snapped. Tess's reaction mirrored Fleming's. He cursed under his breath as well. He suspected it's a result of the impact when he fell, hitting his head. Fleming continued, his face grim. "Is it serious, Gary?" Day asked, biting his lip. His expression serious. "He don't know. It could be either way." Fleming shook his head. "What does that mean?" "If it's a mild case, he's just suffered temporary memory loss and will recover after some rest. If it's bad, well, do I need to spell it out?" Fleming said, his voice tight. Day waved his hand, signaling that he understood. "What should we do now?" "Take him to the hospital." "But the game's still going on, and we're behind. We need him to manage the team." As he spoke, he turned to look at Tony Dunn, only to find him slowly moving toward the player tunnel on his own. "Hey." Day quickly left Fleming's side and rushed over to catch up with him. "Tony, where are you going?" In the chaotic environment, Tess's frantic shout barely carried above the noise. Dunn turned back with a blank expression. The look in his eyes struck Day deeply. The golden sunlight from the setting sun bathed them both, but there was no spark of life in Dunn's eyes. "Tony, where are you going?" Day repeated, "I don't know, maybe home," Dunn murmured, still trying to pull away from Tess's grip. Fleming had caught up by now. "Tony, you can't go home. We're in the middle of a match. You're the coach. You need to manage the team." The three of them struggled in the tunnel, attracting the attention of both the substitute benches and the fans in the stands. Even the players on the pitch occasionally glanced over. Dunn suddenly smiled at the coach. It seemed absurd. How could he possibly be the coach? Sure, he was a fan, and he often played football manager games. But how could he be the coach? This had to be a dream, a damn nightmare. "Okay, alright. You are." He looked at Day. Fleming introduced him as though he were introducing the strangers meeting for the first time. "This is Day. Day Walker, a former England international. The centre-back. He retired just last season, and now he's your colleague, your assistant." Dunn nodded, then said to Day, "Okay, you manage the game for me. I need a break." With that, he shrugged off Tess's hand and walked into the tunnel, ignoring the loud boos and the two stunned people behind him. Fleming looked at Dunn's retreating figure, then glanced at Tess's side heavily, turning back toward the pitch. "This game's done for." Dunn sat in the tunnel, leaning against the wall, staring blankly at the surrounding environment across from him. On the white wall was a large logo, a red mushroom with 3 wavy lines underneath, followed by the word Forest in English. "Where am I? What's going on?" "I only had a little too much to drink. Got into a fight with 2 rival fans and got ambushed. Then how did I end up here?" looking at the people outside with their high noses and blue eyes, speaking in some foreign language. Am I dreaming? Or watching a movie? Dunn touched the back of his head, which still ached faintly. Ambushed me from behind, Hagerman said assured. He was just a football fan who liked to drink a little and watch games in crowded places. Like bars lately, his favorite team had been on a losing streak. Always drawing or losing. His mood was already bad when the two opposing fans got to him, fueled by alcohol and anger. They started fighting. He faced both of them without fear. They played dirty. One distracted him in front, while the other snuck up behind and hit him with a blow. Then he opened his eyes and found himself in a chaotic environment, and was soon knocked to the ground by a large black man. The others were speaking a language he couldn't understand. He could hear every word. He couldn't grasp their meaning. His brain felt like it was torn in two, one part familiar with the environment, while the other was lost and anxious. What's my name? He muttered to himself, suddenly covering his mouth. Only then did he realize that the language he had been speaking was English. What the hell happened? Dunn nearly lost his mind as he realized that two completely different thoughts seemed to be battling inside his head. One moment, he believed he was Tony Dunn from England, and the next, he thought he was Tang Yan from Sichuan. Shanae. He banged his head against the wall, trying to cool his overheated brain. Slowly, he closed his eyes and began to focus. He realized he was at a football stadium. The city ground. The match currently underway was an ordinary English league game between Nottingham Forest and Warsaw, the team he was temporarily coaching. Finally understanding where he was, Dunn felt a sense of disbelief so strong that his brain seemed to short-circuit. He slumped in the tunnel, staring blankly at the Forest logo in front of him. The boos from the crowd echoed in his ears, but it all felt distant, as if he no longer had any connection to it. This was the scene that unfolded this afternoon at the city ground. Tony Dunn, the acting manager of Nottingham Forest, was knocked to the ground by one of his own players during a match, seemingly falling into a brief state of unconsciousness. When he regained consciousness, he walked straight into the player's tunnel. Guy Walker took over for the remainder of the match and attended the post-match press conference. However, during the conference, Coach Walker refused to disclose any information regarding Coach Tony Dunn. And where was Tony Dunn at this very moment? He was at home, battling with his reflection in the mirror in stark contrast to the bright lights and laughter of the surrounding neighborhood. Tony Dunn's home felt like a haunted mansion at 8 in the evening. It remained cloaked in darkness. Not a single light was on, with only the faint glow from the street lights outside. Dunn stood in his bathroom, staring at the stranger in the mirror. The man before him had a strong nose, deep-set eyes, blue irises, and brown hair with a slight weave. A middle-aged Englishman. In reality, however, Tony Dunn was only 26 years old, hailing from Sichuan, China. Yet, the man staring back at him in the mirror appeared to be in his mid-30s, with even the beginnings of forehead wrinkles. 34. This was the age of Tony Dunn now. Before he could fully come to terms with this, Dunn had already been forced to accept another harsh truth. It was no longer 2007, the year he got into a fight with someone. The 2003 January 1st, 2003, the price of this realization had been a torn-up New Year's calendar from the Nottingham Forest 2-3 season, shredded beyond recognition. Not only had he inexplicably found himself in the body of an Englishman, he had also been hurled back in time by 4 years and 3 months. Though Dunn had never considered himself particularly handsome, nor had he ever been the type to attract much attention from women, he had grown accustomed to his own face over the past 26 years and had never grown tired of it. Now, he had to accept a completely different version of himself. Another face, and it left him feeling irritable, unsettled. Who the hell is this? He shouted at the mirror, his fist crashing into the glass. In an instant, his reflection shattered into 1,000 pieces, each fragment scattering to the floor with a sound that filled the room. A multitude of faces stared back at him, mocking him. Dunn felt dizzy, stumbling backward and leaning against the smooth wall, gasping for air. "With me?" After a few minutes of silence in the darkness, Dunn began to regain his composure. He decided not to dwell on such complex questions for now. Back in China, he had a habit of seeking solace in alcohol whenever things went wrong. Bars were everywhere in Chengdu, and he might even find a casual fling along the way. He instinctively thought of Nottingham as Chengdu, and, with that, decided to head out and find a bar to drown his sorrows. He didn't care what his current identity was. With a glance at the overcast sky outside, he threw on a thick coat and stepped out the door after suffering a humiliating 0-3 defeat at home to the underdog Walsall. Nottingham Forest had truly hit a rough patch Paul hard. The manager they had placed so much hope in failed to deliver results following the most recent match. Had submitted his resignation to the club's chairman, Nigel Doughty, which was swiftly accepted. Today marked Tony Dunn's first match as the acting head coach of the team. But to his dismay, he was injured on the sideline by one of his own players. Let's take another look at the replay. It seems like he was so stunned by the impact that he forgot to move out of the way. The television in the bar, fixed high on the wall, was airing the day's sports news, with the focus naturally on the dramatic events that unfolded on the sidelines at the Nottingham Forest match with a few forfeits. I've never seen such a disgraceful manager. A drunken man shouted at the TV, flipping at the finger. That Tony Dunn. I know him. He used to be Paul Hart's assistant with the youth team. Honestly, I never thought much of him. He's always quiet. Looks like a coward. Do you really think someone like him can lead Forest out of this mess? Nigel's lost his ambition. Forest is finished. Finished? Do you hear me? Finished, he mumbled, burying his face in his hands, surrounded by toppled bottles of alcohol. As the drunken man finished his rant, the door to the bar opened. The sound of it captured the attention of most patrons, who turned their gaze toward the door. Their expressions shifted from surprise to mocking smiles as they recognized the person entering. Hey, look who it is. A middle-aged man with the typical British demeanor stood up, raising his glass. Our very own Tony Dunn, the manager. Woo! The crowd cheered, responding with exaggerated cheers and booster. That lovely tackle on Johnson. Here's to you, Dunn, for stopping his breakthrough on the sidelines. The man raised his glass, and the surrounding crowd clinked their glasses in agreement. Cheers. Another clearly intoxicated man staggered to his feet, walking unsteadily toward Dunn, holding a beer bottle to his lips. After a loud burp, he slurred, Tony Dunn, that was one hell of a defensive play. But the referee and the press didn't seem to agree. What's your take on that? He turned away, laughing to himself and glancing back at the others in the bar. Not wanting to escalate things, simply pushed the bottle away, his face dark with frustration. He wasn't here for trouble. He came to drink away his sorrow. Walking to the bar, he spoke to the bartender. A bottle of he instinctively began to say smaller, referring to a bottle of Urguoto, a potent liquor he loved since his university days in the north. But quickly remembered where he was. He muttered to himself in frustration before adjusting. The strongest drink you have. The others, overhearing, burst into loud laughter. Well, look at this. Tony Dunn is actually drinking, one man teased. Want some milk? Dunn, I think it's more your style. A chubby man cupped his sagging chest and screamed, causing those around him to laugh uncontrollably. The young bartender, unsure how to handle the rowdy crowd, was caught between fetching the alcohol and dealing with the increasingly loud drunks. Get him juice. Someone yelled. No, make it milk. We've got fresh milk. Came another shout. A loud voice interrupted from the stairs above. The bar's owner, Kenny Burns, descended, surveying the scene when he saw the chaos. With everyone gathered around the bar and mocking the man in the black coat, he raised his voice, demanding silence. What's going on here? His booming voice immediately silenced the crowd. The once loud drunks fell silent as they turned to face him. John, intrigued, wondered who could command such authority. With just a few words, he tilted his head slightly and noticed a man emerging from the shadow of the stairs. The bartender immediately pointed to Dunn and explained, he wants a strong drink. The newcomer looked surprised. The nodded, give it to him, then. But they're not letting me. The bartender hesitated, looking nervously at the patrons who had returned to their seats. The man surveyed the bar, and anyone who met his gaze quickly looked away, either pretending to sleep or downing their drinks down. Growing more intrigued by this composed middle-aged man, watch as the atmosphere shifted. Don't think anyone has a problem with this, the bar owner said, turning back to the bartender. Give him a glass of Scotch whiskey. My treaty. Then asked Dunn, single or double? Ice or water? Dunn, surprised, asked, with rocks. The patrons are often defiant. Bar owner chuckled. Forgot who you were for a moment. He poured half a glass of golden whiskey. then added half a glass of water and handed it to Dunn. "This is from my hometown." Dunn took a sip, then immediately coughed. He rarely drank spirits, and the rich smoky flavor of the scotch was overwhelming the finty Tony Dunn I know doesn't drink at all. He lives like a true Puritan, and he certainly doesn't look at me with that expression. "Don't you know who I am?" The man glared at Dunn. Dunn felt as though the man could see straight through him. He had to come up with a way to hide his true feelings. Dunn lowered his gaze and took another sip, swallowing quickly this time, trying to mask his discomfort. "I fell on the sidelines this afternoon." The laughter only grew louder. The man rubbed the back of his head, seemingly understanding. Someone nearby came to Dunn's defense, shouting, "Looks like our Dunn's really lost it." The man next to him is none other than the pride of Nottingham Forest, Kenny Burns, two-time European Cup winner, 1978 Stanley Matthews awardee. "He's 100 times better than you, you idiot." While Dunn appreciated the introduction to the prominent figure beside him, it did not mean he had to endure this insult arriving in an unfamiliar place. Already tense and on edge, he found himself increasingly agitated after the embarrassment earlier on the pitch. The mocking continued in the bar. He had swallowed his frustration. The enough was enough. He had never been one to back down. And in China, he was known as an angry young man. The laughter continued behind him as he stood still, his temper rising suddenly. He turned, flinging the remaining half of his whiskey at the person behind him. The amber liquid glittered under the lights, forming a perfect arc before landing squarely on the man's face like a backhand free kick. The man wiped the alcohol from his face and, furious, began to shout, "You little boom!" Dunn's response was swift, grabbing the nearest glass and smashing it into the man's forehead. Silencing his insults, Dunn had had enough of this strange, inexplicable turn of events being thrust into another life, mocked and ridiculed. The two men collided with a table, bottles crashing to the floor, where the cacophony of shattered glass nodders stopped instantly, and everyone froze, stunned by the sudden eruption from the man they had been mocking. First to react was the bar owner, Kenny Burns, who shoved a bystander aside and yelled, "What are you standing around for? Break them up!" This shout brought everyone to their senses, and the crowd surged forward, struggling to separate the two men. The person Dunn had attacked had a bloody circle on his forehead, the mark of the glass rim, and a bruised cheek from the punch. As for Dunn, his hair and clothes were disheveled. He was otherwise unharmed. He stood up, his fury spent, adjusting his clothes and hair, then spat at the man he just bested. "I don't care who you are, don't mess with me." Turning to Burns, he added, "Sorry for the mess, it's been one hell of a day." He didn't wait for a response before heading for the door. As he passed the fat man, he sneered, "Keep your milk for yourself, fat pig." As he pushed the door open, no one attempted to stop him. They watched as he left, leaving behind a scene of chaos. The bar was silent a moment later. The drunk who had been talking earlier sat up, looked around at the stunned patrons, and asked, "Did I miss something?" Tony stumbled blindly through the streets. Lost in his own thoughts, he crossed one street after another, unaware of where he was heading, until exhaustion overtook him. He sank onto a bench by the roadside. Though he had just been in a fight, it hadn't brought him the relief he had hoped for. Instead, it deepened his frustration, for he had come to a painful realization. This was his reality now. He had become an Englishman, and there was no turning back. Dense sky. He tilted his head upwards, but all he could see were dense, swirling clouds. He still couldn't comprehend why he was the one to suffer this fate. If this was some sort of cosmic plan, was there any particular reason why fate had chosen him? Or was it all as random as a lottery draw, with fate merely picking a ball from a pile of ping-pong balls, and he happened to be the unlucky one? "I don't want to be this damn coach. I don't want to be a bloody Brit. I just want to go back. I want to go back." But could Dunn shout that? Now in his 26 years of life, he had never bowed his head to anyone or anything. He was like a stone in a cesspool, stubborn, unpleasant, and hard, and that's why he had accomplished nothing from primary school, where teachers labeled him as the most difficult student, to university, where he never made the cut for any club or political position, to his career, where he was always sidelined and ostracized. He had never even had a girlfriend. In short, his 26 years had been a complete failure. Tony lifted his head again and gazed at the dark night sky. Suddenly, a thought struck him. Since his previous life had been so miserable, Why not seize this chance for a different kind of life? Though he had never been a football coach, he had watched the sport for over a decade and had played football manager games for years. He knew the basics of coaching, and perhaps this was the perfect opportunity to take on a new challenge. Stop dwelling on why fate had chosen him for this pointless role now. All he needed to focus on was how to become a true professional coach. Though it would be difficult, it was worth the try. "Hey, mate, you didn't get my permission to enter my home. I'll call the police if you don't leave now." The gruff, old voice suddenly interrupted his thoughts. 10, 9, 8. Tony blinked in confusion, glancing at the elderly man standing in front of him. The man was clutching a pile of newspapers in his arms, holding a half-eaten hamburger in his hand. "Is this your home?" Dunn gestured awkwardly to the bench beneath him. "Of course," the old man replied. "Oh, sorry, didn't mean to disturb you." Dunn scrambled to his feet, and the old man immediately plopped down onto the bench. Reclining comfortably, he spread the newspapers over himself and tucked them firmly between the backrest and his body. Watching the old man, satisfied as he ate his hamburger in his newspaper nest, Dunn couldn't help but feel a strange sense of gratitude. Fate hadn't been too cruel to him. After a taxi pulled up in front of him, and Dunn quickly walked over, slipping inside as the car pulled away. He glanced one last time at the old man enjoying his dinner in the cold wind. He instructed the driver to take him back to his unfamiliar new home. From that moment onward, a brand new world slowly unfolded before Dunn's eyes. Volume 1, The Sleeping Force, Chapter 2. Mr. Chairman. The entire night, Dunn found himself unable to sleep soundly, having left behind the comfort of his familiar bed. He tossed and turned on the larger bed, as strange and disjointed dreams filled his mind. In these dreams, he saw himself brimming with youthful vitality, standing at the gates of the city ground with a travel bag in hand. Then he found himself beside a lush green football pitch, standing next to a middle-aged stranger, surrounded by dozens of youthful players who eagerly listened to their conversation. The middle-aged man appeared several times in his dream, and each time Dunn stood silently by his side, like a statue. Later, the scene shifted back to the same football field, but the middle-aged man had disappeared now. It was Dunn who was surrounded by the young players, speaking to them, offering guidance. The dream continued to morph. He saw the familiar field again, where the middle-aged man now stood dressed sharply in a suit, directing the match. Dunn remained silent. Just as before, as the dream changed, the man's temperament grew increasingly irritable, until finally, one day, he was gone. An elderly figure stood before him, patting Dunn's shoulder. No sound reached him, nothing but silence. Then he woke up when Dunn opened his eyes. The sky outside was still gray and dull. He heard the steady patter of rain against the window. Sitting up on the bed, his eyes slowly adjusted to the dimness of the room. He gazed at the unfamiliar room and still couldn't quite believe it. He was in England, living as a football coach. Well, technically, an interim coach. He rubbed his hands over his face, trying to shake off the fog in his mind. Dunn jumped out of bed and pulled open the tightly shut curtains. It was morning outside. Though the streets were still quiet, the wet pavement reflected the streetlights and car headlights. As the rain continued to fall, the sight of the dreary weather reminded him of his hometown, a small city in Sichuan, known for its constant rainfall, whether summer or winter. It was always jammed. Seeing such a morning made him feel a strange sense of familiarity. Shivering slightly, Dunn realized he was still in just his underwear. He quickly grabbed some clothes and went to the bathroom to wash up. Dunn, the coach, resided in a place called Brantford Gardens, an ordinary residential area in the Wilford district on the southern bank of the River Trent. It was a typical red brick house, complete with a small garden. The house wasn't large by Nottingham standards, but it was spacious enough for a single man. The rent was cheap, and more importantly, it was very close to the Forest's training base and youth academy, with a 20-minute walk to the northeast. He could reach the academy gates nestled among the trees. After finishing his morning routine, Dunn headed to the kitchen in search of breakfast. He found it covered with notes. He grabbed a carton of milk and some bread, then stood in front of the fridge reading the sticky notes as he ate his simple meal. The most noticeable note was an A4-size sheet. After glancing at its contents, Dunn felt a wave of dizziness wash over him. 6:30 to 7 o'clock. Morning run 7 o'clock to 7:20. Breakfast 7 o'clock to 7:40. Read the newspaper. 7:40 to 8 o'clock. Head to the training ground. Note: for match days, please refer to a separate schedule. It was an extraordinarily detailed daily schedule, down to the minute, with numerous notes and annotations from the moment he opened his eyes. This schedule was followed meticulously until he returned to bed and closed his eyes once more. That damn obsessive-compulsive disorder, Dunn muttered under his breath for someone like him, who preferred a laid-back lifestyle, dividing his day into minute-by-minute segments and filling each segment with tasks felt like a form of torture. His life had been planned out before he even opened his eyes. What to do at which minute, when to stop, and when to resume. He might as well have had scheduled bathroom breaks. Everything so meticulously organized. He finally understood why Kenny Burns had been so surprised to see him drinking yesterday. The old Tony Dunn was a workaholic, devoid of charm, incapable of enjoying life, rigid, stubborn, and mechanical. A person like that managing to survive 34 years, an absolute miracle. Around the schedule, there were also yellow, green, and red sticky notes with different messages. The yellow notes were reminders for upcoming meetings. The green ones were phone numbers, few in number, likely ending up in Tony Dunn's personal contact book, and the red ones were important daily reminders. Dunn scanned them one by one until he found the red note from yesterday morning. Aside from the date, the note read, "First match's head coach must win." Seeing the note filled with 3 emphatic exclamation marks, Dunn paused. It was the first time he had seen Tony Dunn use punctuation to convey strong emotion. Staring at the messy handwriting, Dunn could almost picture the expression on his face when he wrote it, clenching his fists, gritting his teeth, filled with anticipation and determination. But Dunn remembered the news from yesterday. The Forest had suffered a humiliating 3-0 loss at home to the weak Warsaw. Was it his sudden arrival that had robbed him of the victory? Dunn stared blankly at the notes on the fridge. He must have planned everything meticulously, even briefing the players the day before. What good was that? They still lost. There's a saying in China, plans can't keep up with changes. He ripped off the sticky notes one by one, leaving only the red note that said, "Must win." He tossed the notes and the milk carton into the trash can, clapped his hands, and walked out of the kitchen back in the bedroom. The sky was getting lighter. Though the rain still fell, pedestrians and cars were gradually filling the streets. Dunn noticed that the schedule mentioned going to the training ground at 8 o'clock. He looked at his watch. 7:40. No matter how absurd the reality, he had become Tony Dunn, stepping into the shoes of this unlucky man. It was only right for him to do the work of this unlucky man. Dunn wasn't the type to shirk responsibility, and when watching football, he never believed that victory came without effort. Grabbed his coat, picked up his black umbrella, and pushed open the door, stepping out into the rain. The Forest's training base was also located in the Wilford district, where the River Trent makes a sharp unshaped bend, creating a vast expanse of flat land. A century ago, this area was fertile farmland and dense forests. Nottingham was merely a small area on the northern bank. Now, with the city's expanding footprint, the southern side of the Trent has become a well-developed residential area. The Forest Football Club purchased this land and transformed it into their training complex. The elongated training complex was split into 2 sections by a narrow road called Wilford Lane. The larger northern section housed the youth team's training facility, one of the most renowned academies in all of England. The smaller southern area was the first team's training ground, also known as Wilford. The rain in England's winter wasn't heavy, but it was incessant and irritating, constantly falling without respite. Dunn found little difference, as his hometown and his post-graduation city of Chengdu were also prone to persistent winter rains. Ian MacDonald, the elderly gatekeeper of the facility, looked at Dunn with curiosity. His trousers soaked. "Tony, what brings you here today?" Dunn found the question absurd. "I'm here for training, of course." "But Tony," MacDonald replied, "today is January 2nd, 2003. The team is on holiday. A New Year break." Dunn slipped at Ishvango Dunn's gesture. MacDonald gently shook his head. He probably thought the collision from the day before had caused Dunn's mind to wander. "I say, it's so quiet here. Happy New Year," Dunn offered awkwardly, then turned to leave. Just then, he noticed a dark red Audi A6 pulling up beside him. The rear door opened, and an elderly man emerged. Dunn's subconscious immediately recognized him as his boss, the chairman of the club. Nigel Dowdy. Following him was a middle-aged man, about Dunn's age. tall and sharp-looking, dressed in a well-fitted casual jacket, holding an umbrella that shielded most of it from the rain. Upon seeing Dunn, the elderly man opened his arms and embraced him. "Tony, I saw the news yesterday. Forgive me for not calling you. My son just returned from the US to see me. Are you alright?" Dunn was taken aback by his boss's warmth. He quickly responded, "I think I'm fine. Thank you, Mr. Chairman." Nigel released Dunn and pointed to the man beside him. "This is my son, Evan." Evan Dowdy extended his hand. "Hello, it's a pleasure to meet you, Coach." His father interrupted. "Evan, I've told you countless times, don't call him Coach. It's manager here, not America." Evan smiled apologetically at Dunn. "Sorry, manager." Dunn extended his hand, smiling awkwardly. "No problem, it's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Dowdy," the chairman interjected. "My son just returned from the US. He grew up there and feels strange about England now. He's an American in his heart, raised on the NBA." Evans Malado then standing before his employer, recalled the red note on his fridge and felt compelled to explain yesterday's loss, even if it meant lying. "Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry about yesterday's defeat." To his surprise, Nigel placed a hand on his shoulder and reassured him. "Tony, I don't like failure either. But this is not solely your responsibility. These last 2 seasons," the chairman's eyes turned distant, gazing at the sky as he muttered a curse, then turned his gaze back. "Do your best, don't overthink it. I won't put any pressure on you. Happy New Year, Tony." He patted Dunn's shoulder and turned, walking into the training facility with his son. Then stood at the entrance, watching the chairman's hunchback and his son, Evan, holding an umbrella for him. A strange feeling welled up inside him. He had accepted the reality of being a football coach in the blink of an eye, but emotionally, he couldn't quite accept this team. He didn't know much about Nottingham Forest. Aside from their former glory, he wasn't even a fan of the team. Yet, the 2 gentle pats on his shoulder from the old man warmed his heart. As an outsider, such warmth was rare and precious. He decided to give his best, to put in the utmost effort, not only to prove himself to the drunkards at the bar, but also to live up to the chairman's trust in him. Even if the man didn't know that the Tony Dunn he trusted wasn't the same as the one he had known. "Happy New Year, old man." After leaving the Wilford training base, Dunn wandered the streets aimlessly. In different directions, the rain had stopped, and he casually used his umbrella as a walking stick. There were far more pedestrians than when he had left. It was a public holiday, so naturally, people were out enjoying themselves. The festive atmosphere of the new year was everywhere, but not for Dunn. He had no interest in celebrating. He found it odd how easily he could understand every English word and sentence, as if it were instinctual, just as familiar as his native Chinese. Along with the life skills he had acquired, yet there were important things he seemed to forget. His memory felt fragmented. He couldn't remember how the previous Tony Dunn had trained the team or arranged tactics. He had no idea about his relationships or influence within the club. Therefore, he couldn't understand why the chairman had been so kind to him sometimes. However, those missing memories would return briefly, only to vanish again. But he did know what kind of person the original Tony Dunn had been. He was methodical, quiet, diligent, and hardworking in his private life. He was like an ascetic: no smoking, no drinking, no relationships, and never stepping foot in places of ill repute. His daily routine was rigid and predictable, like the clockwork chants of Big Ben. "God damn," Dunn muttered, recalling the life of Tony Dunn. This was like living in the Middle Ages. How could anyone live like that? He summarized his current situation. This body wasn't his. It belonged to someone named Tony Dunn, a man from the past. At his heart, his soul belonged to Dunn, and now he had to reconcile these 2 conflicting identities. Perhaps it was a blessing in disguise. Dunn thought that yesterday's mishap had made it clear to everyone that his head had been injured. No one would question the change in his character. Weary, Dunn sat on a bench by the street and began contemplating how to be a successful manager. Determined not to let the chairman's trust go to waste, he sat there for a long time, his thoughts muddled. He had no idea how to train the team, nor how to lead them to victory. His experience playing football manager games was useless now. He didn't even know the players well. At least not yet. He couldn't just point out who should play where and how they should act, like he would if he were watching a match on television. Even worse, Time was running out. The team was on holiday today. That they would regroup tomorrow and prepare for their third-round FA Cup match against West Ham. Forest had already endured 3 consecutive losses in the league, and their new manager had become a laughingstock on TV. Morale was at rock bottom. West Ham might be struggling too. So they were still a better team than side. It's just one misfortune after another. If this is fate, then it really is a cruel joke. Looking up, he saw a large pub across the street. Seeing the sign, he decided to go in and have a drink, momentarily putting his troubles aside. Being in England isn't all bad. At least the pubs are everywhere, he muttered as he crossed the street and pushed open the heavy door. Sorry, we're not open yet. I forgot to put the sign outside. The middle-aged man behind the bar looked up as the door jingled. The froze when he recognized Dunn. Dunn froze too, as he realized the man standing before him was Kenny Burns, the same person who had bought him drinks the previous night. What a coincidence! Dunn's immediate reaction was to back out of the pub, glance at the sign, then walk in and look around. How the hell did I end up here? He muttered under his breath. Burns, amused, said, looks like yesterday's collision really changed our Tony Dunn. Seeing an opportunity, played along. Yeah, the old me, I never swore, was as quiet as a woman not open yet. Maybe I should find another place. He turned to leave, but Burns left hardly behind him. No need to bother. We don't open until 11:30 a.m. Dunn turned back. Embarrassed. I don't come often, so I didn't know. It's not that you don't come often. Today's only your second time in a pub. I told you, you lived like a Puritan before, didn't you? Burns said with a smile. Dunn nodded, not minding the comment. He was an atheist, and didn't care about how others categorized him. Burns walked out from behind the bar and waved at Dunn. Since you're here, don't leave. I'm bored, so let's chat for a while. Of course, I'll buy you a drink. Dunn, eager to talk, blinked. The finest Scotch whiskey. Burns laughed again. That's right, the finest Scotch from my hometown. Don't go pouring the glass over my face again. About that incident, I owe you a proper apology. It's nothing. A fight in a pub is just a part of life. People get rowdy when they've had a bit too much, especially during a match. Burns nodded, understanding. Volume 1, The Sleeping Forest. Chapter 3, Tony Dunn's past bar, not yet officially open, remained in the shadows, with no lights to break the dimness. The half-drawn blinds outside the window allowed only slanted rays of light to filter through, casting a faint glow that danced across the room, illuminating the drifting dust particles I'd misused in a stage effect. This ambience was hardly conducive to reading or studying the news, though, in truth, neither of the two men in the bar needed to. One sat behind the counter, the other perched on a high stool outside it. In front of them rested 2 heavy glass tumblers, filled with amber-colored liqueur. The quiet, dim atmosphere, however, was perfect for conversation. Tony, do you know, Burns said, refilling the empty glass, your performance last night truly opened my eyes. I was quite surprised. Oh, even after downing 5 strong whiskeys. Tony, a seasoned drinker, still felt slightly tipsy. I've been here 7 years now, and I've watched you grow. When you first arrived, you were so young. Never once did I see you get into conflict with anyone. You had a good temper, despite being a bit of a loner, always facing others with a smile. But last night, those old men were drunk, and if they had been sober, they certainly wouldn't have done anything so overboard. That I didn't expect your reaction to be so intense. You moved like a man in his prime, not a football coach. Tony forced a bitter smile. He hadn't realized that others still saw him as a good-natured person. Maybe you're right, but I can't quite recall. He mockingly rubbed the back of his head, a pained expression on his face. I've forgotten so much. He realized he had quite the talent for acting. I don't remember how I used to train the team. First feels unfamiliar to me. The match is the day after tomorrow. That I don't know how to lead them. Tony buried his head in his arms. Deeply frustrated, he realized he was fully immersed in this role, not just the current scene, but in the entire drama of being Tony Dunn, the acting head coach of Nottingham Forest. Seeing Tony in such apparent distress, Burns recognized that the situation was far more serious than he had initially thought. So, you're saying you've forgotten all your abilities as a coach? That's one way to put it, Tony said, keeping his head lowered. That's really bad. Does old man Doggett know about this? I haven't. He told him, Tony replied, shaking his head. Burns lightly tapped his fingers on the bar. Seemingly pondering a solution, Tony lifted his gaze to meet Burns. Kenny, can you tell me how I used to coach? Burns clapped his hands together. Good idea, maybe recalling the old. You will help jog some memories. Let me think. You joined Forest 7 years ago. For a football fan, time is often measured in terms of football, each year marked by significant events in the sport, leaving indelible imprints on their personal timeline. When they recall a particular year, they don't ask what they were doing at the time, for they may have long forgotten that. Instead, they will clearly recount what happened in the football world that year, what important events took place, which players rose to prominence, who faded into obscurity, and which achieved great success. Along with this, they might share some gossip. Tony was no different in 2003. At just under 23 years of age, he had recently graduated from university. Looking back 7 years to 1996, he was still a middle school student. He couldn't remember what he had done that year, but he still vividly recalled the summer. It was the year of the 9th European Championship. Held with fanfare across England, he would sneak late into the night to watch matches. Then the following day, spent his pocket money on sports newspapers, hungrily devouring reports and stories about the previous day's games in an era before widespread internet and television broadcasts were just beginning in China. His access to information was limited, yet this did not stop him from falling completely in love with football. He had met Gascoigne, though by then, the man was already a household name. He had also met Pierre Hoff, who, despite being 28, was still referred to as a newcomer. Zidane had entered the public eye that year, and he would later be named Europe's Footballer of the Century. Tony had crossed paths with countless others, figures who would accompany him through the next decade, from middle school to high school, to university, and finally into the world of work. Some had retired, others continued their struggles. The rookies of yesteryear were now aging, the stars of the past had faded from view, and those who once went unnoticed had blossomed into the top players of today. They had been the pillars of Tony's youth, his companions, appearing every weekend to share their time with him. He could not find the words to describe the emotions he felt. This man, once so unappealing to others, so stiff and gruff, could now be moved to tears by the retirement of a football star. Though, of course, he would never allow anyone to witness his tears. In 2003, 7 years earlier, he had watched his first major international football event, and it was there that he fell completely under the spell of the sport, becoming a devoted follower. It was the only passion that had ever truly accompanied him at the other end of the world. A young man with the same name was about to face a turning point in his life. Tony Dunn, from the small town of Eastwood, had left his hometown behind. Much like the other Tony, he too loved football. That after a family tragedy, his personality underwent a profound transformation. He could no longer bear to stay in the place that had caused him so much pain, and so he decided to strike out on his own. What could a quiet, withdrawn man like Tony possibly do? Wherever he went, it seemed, he would stir a breeze of discomfort. He was simply not liked by anyone. Moreover, he had no skills, other than his fervent passion for football. Eventually, fate gave him a chance. The summer of 1996 in England was suffused with the fervor of football. This once isolated country had finally shaken off its darkest days and stepped back into the global spotlight. Nottingham, in the heart of England, was no different. After suffering the pain of relegation from the Premier League in the 1990-93 season, Forest had returned to the top league the following year and enjoyed a dream season in 1994-95. They achieved a remarkable third-place finish in the league, securing a spot in the UEFA Cup after 11 long years. Forest had returned to European competition. However, the glory of the European stage was short-lived. Like many smaller clubs, Forest now faced the inevitable challenges of competing with the wealth of the larger teams, lured by the financial allure of the big clubs. They sold their star player, Stan Collymore, to Liverpool for £85 million and brought in new national team player Andrea Silenzi from Torino for £18 million. The tall Italian had scored 17 goals in one season with Torino and had earned his place in the national team. But, to their dismay, he would go on to become one of Forest's greatest disappointments. That season was at this time that Tony Dunn arrived at Forest. The club had made new personnel changes in their youth academy and needed to hire some staff a passionate football lover. Tony walked through the doors of Forest's training ground. His first job was as a groundskeeper. But Tony knew his true calling. He keenly observed the coaches, listening carefully to their conversations with the players, noting their methods, and reflecting on them. He was only 27 that year. All of Forest's efforts that summer came to naught 11 years after their return to European competition. They could no longer keep up with the pace of the continental game. Though they had reached the UEFA Cup quarter-finals, they were humiliated by the mighty Bayern Munich with a 7-2 aggregate score and were eliminated. At the same time, the strain of competing on two fronts affected their domestic league performance, and they finished the season in a disappointing 9th place. Disheartened, the board dismissed Frank Clark, the coach who had led the team back to the Premier League. Stuart Pearce, the 34-year-old team captain and left-back, was appointed as the interim coach. It was during this time that Tony met the most important person of his life. Paul Forest had brought him in from Leeds United's youth academy to become the head coach of Forest's youth team. He was the person who had appeared in Tony's dreams several times. Paul Hart was a highly respected youth coach, having cultivated a host of talents during his time at Leeds, including Jonathan Woodgate, Alan Smith, Paul Robinson, and Harry Kewell. Looking at these now prominent names, it was clear to see the legacy of Hart's coaching. Hart's arrival changed the trajectory of Tony's life. A new addition to the team, Hart lacked a trusted assistant, and he saw the hardworking, eager to learn Tony Dunn as a perfect fit. He suggested to the club that they offer Tony a new contract, making him one of Forest's first assistant coaches for the youth team. This marked the beginning of Tony's coaching journey. Hart valued Tony for his diligence and his no-nonsense attitude. Taking him along to all occasions, Tony learned much from this accomplished youth coach. Forest's youth academy had always been one of the best in England. Hart's arrival took it to even greater heights under his leadership. Forest's youth squad produced an exceptional team, with the standout player being a young man named Jermaine Jenas. The team performed admirably in the first half of the season, and Pearce proved his ability as a coach. That the board once again made a foolish decision, failing to appoint Pearce permanently and instead hiring Bassett to co-coach the division of power weakened the team's spirit, and they were inevitably relegated at the end of the season. After relegation, Forest was taken over by the current club chairman, Nigel Doggett, who chose to place his trust in Bassett. Bassett lived up to expectations, and after a year, Forest returned to the Premier League. Their dreams were short. Lived in the 1999-2000 season, Forest were relegated once again, and Bassett was dismissed. Doggett turned to David Platt as the new head coach. However, the team never regained its former strength, and instead of returning to the Premier League, they languished in the second-tier league year after year, losing much of their former energy and ambition. In the summer of 2001, the English Football Association appointed Platt as the head coach of the England youth team, allowing Platt to pass his position at Forest to Paul Hart. In turn, left his role as head coach of the youth team to Tony Dunn. Hart had recommended Tony to Doggett, believing him to have the potential to become a successful coach. Hart's prize player, Jenas, was also promoted to the first team to compete in the first division. Tony Dunn truly possessed some skill, though much of his success with the youth team was built upon the foundation laid by Paul Hart. During his tenure as the youth team's coach, several players began to emerge as standouts, soon becoming the focal points of the squad. Among them were left midfielder Andy Reid and the team captain, central defender Michael Dawson. Tony had always aspired to emulate Paul Hart. To be as successful a coach in the youth ranks, he relished the joy of discovering hidden gems among a sea of young faces, feeling a sense of accomplishment as those tender saplings grew under his care into towering oaks, a satisfaction no less fulfilling than winning the European Cup. However, 3 days ago, his quiet existence was irrevocably altered. Paul Hart was no novice in the coaching world. In the summer of 2001, the club appointed him head coach in hopes of securing promotion to the Premier League. To make this possible, Doggett invested large sums, even borrowing from the bank to fund the team's growth. From the media to the fans, there was a palpable sense of optimism about the future. As the Nottingham Evening Post put it, "This is a team that simply does not belong in the second division. They are a Premier League side in every sense. Their strength is undeniable, and their ambitions are high yet. All of this changed due to an off-the-pitch disaster in an effort to counter Sky TV's broadcasting monopoly on the Premier League. ITV purchased broadcasting rights for all the lower divisions. However, the lower-tier leagues couldn't compete with the Premier League's allure, and the television company, having spent vast sums, did not see the returns it had hoped for. Financial burdens mounted, and the company eventually declared bankruptcy. As a result, the lower leagues were hit hard. Club owners and coaches from numerous teams found themselves stranded without funds. Their clubs drowning in debt. The star players they had splurged on became their greatest liabilities. Forest, having invested heavily at the season's start, felt the brunt of the economic crisis after a dismal season. They had no choice but to sell off their highest-paid players to ease the financial strain. One such player was Jermaine Jenas, hailed as the epitome of English youth training, who was transferred to Newcastle for a record £5 million, setting a new benchmark for the most expensive young player in English football. Historic Jenas' move was not driven by his or the coach's desires, but was a desperate attempt to alleviate the club's financial woes. Older clubs like Liverpool, Arsenal, and Manchester United had expressed interest. Jenas ultimately chose to move to Newcastle, the club offering the highest bid. The sale of his prize players struck a devastating blow to Paul Hart, whose ambition evaporated with Jenas' departure. With key players leaving, those who remained were left uneasy, unsure if they would be next to be sold. The more capable players began seeking out new opportunities. Distracted and disengaged from the game, it was no surprise that Forest's performance faltered by the midway point of the 2002-03 season. Forest found themselves in mid-table, a far cry from their once glorious past and the high hopes for promotion finale. On the third day after Christmas, the burdened Paul Hart took the initiative and resigned. After a lengthy conversation with Doggett, the chairman agreed to his resignation, and as compensation for stepping down, Hart recommended Tony Dunn as his successor. Doggett was familiar with Tony and held a favorable impression. Given Tony's 7 years of diligent service to the club, his work with the youth team had been widely acknowledged, so it was no surprise when, on December 29, 2002, Forest officially announced Tony Dunn as the interim head coach of the first team for the remainder of the season. The media and fans eagerly awaited Tony's debut match as the first team coach. Little did they know that he would make a monumental blunder on the sidelines, with the team suffering a humiliating 3-0 loss, a result that would fuel the mockery that followed. Tony, losing isn't the end of the world. Every coach faces defeat at some point, Burns said, trying to console him as they discussed the previous day's game. You've done well with the youth team. You've already proven your abilities. Tony couldn't help but recall the scene from the sidelines and the ridicule he faced at the bar later that night. He had been mocked on television, and now, off-screen, his failure would be laughed at again. The real reason wasn't his injury from a collision with a player, but the fact that he had lost once a team loses. They are derided, belittled, and scorned, and even the smallest mistake is magnified beyond reason. Kenny, I know you're right, but I just hate losing so much. Tony downed his drink in one go, slamming the glass back onto the table, his face flushed with the effects of the alcohol. Burns didn't pour him another drink. I hate losing to no player enjoys it. There's some things you just have to go through. The first team is a whole different level compared to the youth team. I think, even if you don't win a single game this season, no one will blame you. I know you weren't prepared. There's always next season. His words would have dropped. Hi, Kenny, is your bar still not open? Burns glanced at his watch. Oh, damn, it's already 11:40. I need to get to work. Come on in, lads. He waved at the people by the door, then turned to switch on the lights. Door swung open, and a group of 7 or 8 people put in. The once quiet and dimly lit bar suddenly buzzed with life. The presence of so many people filling the space with an infectious energy that seemed to brighten the room. They chatted excitedly about all manner of topics, making their way to the bar to order drinks. It was then that Tony, curled up in a corner of the bar, was noticed. Someone quickly recognized him. Well, look who it is. Tony Dunn, the man who got knocked over by his own teammate on the pitch last night. And now here he is, hiding out in the Forest bar, drunk as a skunk. Is this the secret to winning the next FA Cup match for Forest? A young man danced around, his movements and speech mimicking the rhythm of a rap. The absurdity of his tone causing those around him to burst into laughter. Hearing the ruckus behind him, Tony slowly turned around. Squinting as he sized up the young man, he had no recollection of him. But judging by his words, it seemed he had been there the previous night as well, you little brat. Tony struggled to rise, though his real age was only 26. His body, at 34, felt the strain. He wasted no time asserting his authority in Tony trying to stand. The laughter around them quickly shifted to tension. The others, who had witnessed Tony swiftly take down the towering Michael the day before, were on edge. Michael, bruised and blooded, had gone home to face the wrath of his wife, and now he wouldn't even step foot in the bar, choosing instead to appease his wife at home. Only the young, naive lad hadn't learned Tony's reputation yet. He adopted a cocky stance, hopping around, his words playful yet taunting. Come on, mate. Don't think I'm afraid of you, Thad. A heavy beer mug slammed onto the table, its sound drowning out the young man's bravado. Whose Irish stout is this? Burns' voice cut through the tension as he leaned between the two. The young man quickly retracted his fist and grabbed his drink. Mine. Burns waved the mug in front of him. No nonsense in my bar. His words silenced the room, the mood suddenly shifting. Tony, disinterested in the group, felt an overwhelming urge to leave. The growing crowd in the bar made him uncomfortable. Burns escorted him out of the bar personally, then paused, grabbing his arm. Tony, listen. If you're not sure how to coach the team or lead them through the match, you can always delegate those responsibilities to your assistant. Take it easy until you feel a little more settled. Tony looked up at him. Thank you, Kenny. Burns smiled warmly. No need to thank me. And remember, Michael and the others aren't bad guys. They're some of Forest's most loyal fans. They're just hurt by the way things have been going lately. Don't take it personally. You'll see their better side come match day. Tony nodded, but didn't say more. Give it your best shot. Happy New Year. Tony, same to you. Happy New Year. Kenny. Tony waved at him before turning, slightly unsteady. As he rounded the street corner, Burns watched his retreating figure, shaking his head gently, before turning back toward the bar. Really don't understand, Kenny. Why are you being so nice to that idiot? Muttered John, the heavy-set man who had marked Tony's playing ability the night before. Burns recalled the expression on Tony's face when he had confessed his hatred of failure. A raw, unfiltered emotion. He turned to John. If you say one more word, you're banned from drinking here. Well, won't happen again. The bar was filled with the sound of hearty laughter. Even through the wall, Tony could still hear the laughter spilling from the bar. But at that moment, his stride was steady, his back straight. His gait no longer the stagger one of a drunk. Stood at the curb, waiting for the pedestrian light to turn green. While his mind replayed the advice Burns had just given him, let the assistant coach take over. That's actually not a bad idea.